When the system swallowed the Earth, millions of people were transported to tutorial zones to awaken their classes. Most people finished theirs in an hour. I got the Eternal Ogre. And my system timer broke. Attempt number 10,000. The fear disappeared around attempt 500. The anger faded around attempt 5,000. By attempt 10,000, I was just incredibly, profoundly bored. Every time I killed it, or it killed me, the instance just reset. Attempt 1,000,000. 1,000 years. When you spend a millennium in a single room with a single monster, you stop fighting it. You start dissecting the mathematical code of its existence. I didn't even need to look at it anymore. I realized the tutorial wasn't testing my strength. It was a localized server glitch. So, instead of using a sword, I learned how to strike the foundational code of the room itself. I just needed to hit it hard enough to crash the server. It worked. 1 billion points of damage in a single, localized frame caused a buffer overflow. The indestructible tutorial zone shattered like cheap glass, and the system finally initiated a forced emergency ejection. I expected to step out into a quiet awakening center, maybe get my hunter license, and finally eat a hot bowl of ramen. Instead, I stepped out into a burning intersection. The world hadn't just changed, it had completely ended. While I was stuck in a time-dilated loop for 1,000 years, the real world had apparently spent a decade losing a war against the abyss. I watched a squad of heavily armored elites running for their lives from an S-rank Cerberus. A normal person would have run. A hero would have drawn a weapon. I just wanted a snack. I hadn't eaten anything but flavorless system rations for a millennium. I completely ignored the giant flaming dog and walked over to a smashed convenience store. I dug through the rubble and found a cup of instant ramen. But the expiration date was 10 years ago. The apocalypse ruined the supply chain. I felt a profound, soul-crushing despair that no dungeon boss could ever inflict. My morning was interrupted. The S-rank Cerberus decided I looked like an easy appetizer. It loomed over the store, all 3 heads dripping with lava, and unleashed a roar that shattered the remaining glass in the building. I slowly looked up at the beast. It was loud. It was hot. And it was standing between me and my search for a decent restaurant. After 1,000 years of the Eternal Ogre, this oversized dog didn't even register as a threat. It just registered as annoying. It lunged at me. I didn't draw a weapon or cast a spell. I just swatted the air with the back of my hand, applying the exact same foundational code break I used on the ogre. The shockwave hit the Cerberus. It didn't explode. The system simply failed to process the mathematical weight of my strike, and the S-rank boss was instantly deleted from reality, turning into a cloud of white dust. The sheer force parted the clouds over the city for miles. Down the street, the elite strike team had stopped running. They stood frozen in the rubble, their weapons on the ground, staring at me with absolute, mind-shattering shock. They had just watched a man in ripped jeans backhand an apocalyptic threat out of existence. I tossed the expired ramen cup into the rubble. I didn't introduce myself to the hunters or ask for a sitrep, I just opened my old survival manual, flipped to a random page, and started walking. Somewhere in this ruined world, there had to be a chef who survived. I knew the hunters were following me. They weren't exactly stealthy, their armor clanked like a toolbox falling down the stairs. I ignored them. I was busy trying to find a map of the local restaurant district in my survival manual. Not that the manual was any help. After 1,000 years in my back pocket, all the ink had faded into nothing. I was just holding onto it out of habit. Or maybe because it made a decent fan. 2 miles into the ruins, I hit the jackpot. A luxury megamall. Normally, an SS-rank disaster zone covered in pulsating demon flesh is a place to avoid. But to me, a luxury mall meant one thing, a high-end gourmet food court. I walked into the atrium. It was a nest. The gluttony demon, an SS-rank nightmare, had taken over the food court. It didn't care about gold or weapons, it hoarded the most valuable resource in the apocalypse, perfectly preserved, high-end luxury ingredients. I saw crates of A5 Wagyu beef. Pristine. Untouched. Maintained by the ambient chill of the demon's aura. After a millennium of chewing on tasteless, dry system-generated rations, I actually felt a tear of joy roll down my cheek. Outside the shattered glass doors, the hunters finally caught up. I could hear their leader, Captain Jean, hyperventilating into a broken radio, calling for a citywide evacuation. To them, an SS-rank gluttony demon was a walking extinction event. To me, it was just a very ugly refrigerator. I didn't bother sneaking. I walked straight toward the Wagyu. The demon woke up, shrieked, and vomited a tsunami of highly corrosive acidic bile right at me. Captain Jean screamed for me to dodge. I didn't. The acid hit my bare chest. After 1,000 years of taking blunt force trauma from the Eternal Ogre, my physical defense stat had literally broken the system cap. The SS-rank acid just evaporated into steam against my skin. But it did get my jeans wet, which was incredibly annoying. If I used the same wide-area shockwave I used on the Cerberus, I would vaporize the groceries. I couldn't allow that. I had to be delicate. I raised my index finger and condensed the foundational logic break into a microscopic point. I swept my finger. A perfect, three-dimensional grid of razor-sharp system logic passed through the room. It bypassed physical armor entirely and severed the monster's rendering coordinates. The massive demon was instantly diced into 1,000 perfect cubes. The Wagyu beef crates remained flawlessly intact. The demon deleted itself, leaving behind a massive, glowing crimson SS-rank core. An artifact worth enough to buy a small country. I stepped right over it. I pried open the wooden crate. The marbling on the beef was breathtaking. I found a high-end commercial kitchen that was mostly intact. The gas lines were dead, but a tiny spark of logic friction from my finger was enough to ignite the burners. The only problem was all the chairs were broken. So, I rolled the SS-rank demon core over and used it as a stool. The sizzle of the meat hitting the pan was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 10 centuries. No magic, no system skills. Just the pure, unadulterated perfection of high heat and premium fat rendering. I was halfway through my steak when Captain Jean and his squad finally crept into the kitchen. They looked at the dead demon dust. They looked at the priceless core I was sitting on. And then they looked at me, peacefully eating out of a frying pan with chopsticks. Captain Jean stepped forward, his heavy armor shaking. He looked like he was about to ask me if I was a god, or a monster, or the savior of humanity. I just chewed my steak, stared at him blankly, and offered him a napkin. He had a little mud on his visor. Captain Jean spent 10 minutes explaining that a calamity was attacking the last sanctuary. I didn't care. I was savoring the Wagyu. Saving the world sounded exhausting. He realized duty wouldn't motivate me. So he switched tactics. He mentioned the sanctuary was built around the Grand Imperial Hotel, which still had intact memory foam mattresses. A memory foam mattress. After 1,000 years sleeping on cold, jagged obsidian. My system scars flared with pure, unadulterated motivation. The quest was accepted. I left the ruined mall and headed for the highway. The elite hunters trailed behind me. I wasn't marching to war. I was just a very tired tourist heading to my hotel. The last sanctuary was a fortified megacity under a blue energy shield. But the shield was cracking. A colossal void dragon was coiled around the dome, trying to crack it open like a walnut. The dragon roared, its shadowy claws piercing the barrier. Inside, thousands of survivors braced for the end. The military had failed. The apocalypse was finally winning. I arrived at the overlook. The dragon's roaring was deafening. It was giving me a headache. All I wanted was to check into my room, and the hotel was currently being crushed by a screaming lizard. It noticed my system signature. The dragon abandoned the dome, turned its skeletal head toward me, and fired a concentrated beam of absolute void energy designed to erase continents. I didn't even bother taking my other hand out of my pocket. I just raised my fingers and snapped, applying a foundational logic break to a targeted coordinate. The white logic sphere expanded. The calamity didn't explode. It was just quietly and instantly uninstalled from the universe, along with its entire swarm. The sky was immediately clear. The sanctuary gates opened. Thousands of people, generals, and politicians rushed out. They fell to their knees, crying, ready to worship the god who just swatted the apocalypse out of the sky. They tried to hand me medals. They tried to declare me their new king. I walked straight past them without making eye contact. I was exhausted. I found the Grand Imperial Hotel in the center of the city. The lobby was untouched. I walked up to the marble desk, covered in monster ash and glowing with system energy, and politely tapped the service bell. I didn't have local currency. So I dropped the SS-Rank Gluttony core on the counter. The receptionist almost passed out, but he handed me the key to the penthouse. The suite was perfect. I didn't even take off my boots. I face-planted directly onto the memory foam. Let the world burn tomorrow. Tonight, the tourist was finally getting some sleep. 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep on a memory foam mattress. No ogres. No respawn timers. I woke up feeling like a brand new man. Now, there was only one thing on my mind: breakfast. I stepped out of my suite. The hallway was completely packed. Generals, politicians, and Captain Jean were lined up on the crimson carpet, saluting me like I was the second coming. It was a little much for 8 in the morning. General Vance introduced himself as the Supreme Commander. He tried to hand me a tablet with the city's defense grid, begging me to take command of their forces. I didn't take it. I was too busy reading the room service menu I found on the door handle. I asked where the buffet was. They looked confused, but escorted me down the grand marble staircase. Vance kept rambling about the abyssal warlords massing outside the dome. I just nodded politely, hoping they hadn't run out of bacon. We reached the dining hall. It was a pre-apocalyptic paradise. Crystal chandeliers, white linen, and a sprawling buffet. Right in the center was a towering stack of golden, fluffy pancakes. My 1,000-year fast was finally about to end properly. But the universe really hated me eating in peace. The glass skylight above the dining hall violently shattered. An abyssal assassin, an elite infiltrator, dropped straight down into the room, dual daggers glowing with purple void energy. It was a targeted hit. The assassin bypassed the guards and lunged straight for General Vance. The entire military leadership panicked, drawing their weapons too late. I ignored the commotion and picked up a porcelain plate. I was focused on the pancakes. The assassin was fast, I'll give it that. But it was sloppy. Its trajectory carried its void daggers directly over the buffet line. I saw a single drop of highly corrosive void venom fall from the blade, heading straight for the top pancake. I couldn't allow that. Moving purely on reflex, I grabbed a dull silver butter knife from the linen table. I coated the silverware in a microscopic layer of logic break energy and swatted the dagger away, catching the drop of venom on the flat of the blade. The assassin froze mid-air, staring in absolute shock as its ultimate strike was blocked by breakfast cutlery. I glared at it. You almost ruined the syrup absorption. I flicked my wrist, tapping the butter knife against its blade. The logic break transferred through the metal. The elite assassin was blasted backward and instantly deleted from the server before it even hit the dining hall wall. Just a cloud of white dust settling on the pristine carpet. The dining hall fell into dead silence. General Vance and Captain Jean stood frozen, their weapons half drawn, staring at the dust on the wall. They had just watched the deadliest threat in the sector get swatted away like a fly by a man in ripped jeans holding a butter knife. I wiped the butter knife on a napkin, plated 3 pancakes, and reached for the syrup pitcher. The crisis was averted. The food was safe. I took a massive bite. The texture was great, but the syrup tasted off. It was artificial. Corn syrup. Even with a protective dome, the apocalypse ruins the agricultural supply lines. I sighed, feeling a familiar twinge of disappointment. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, turned my chair around, and pointed my fork at a sweating Captain Jean. The syrup here is garbage, I told him completely seriously. Tell me, Captain. Does this city have a district with authentic street food? Captain Jean tried to offer me the executive chef's private reserve. I told him I wanted the exact opposite. If you want to know what a world tastes like after the apocalypse, you don't eat in a penthouse. You go to the slums. The midnight market was a maze of corrugated metal and tangled wires. Captain Jean looked terrified in his elite tactical armor, like a walking loot drop for muggers. I felt right at home. The air was thick with the smell of cheap spices and burning charcoal. Deep in the market, I found what I was looking for. A vendor using a rusted oil drum as a grill, searing twisted skewers of low-tier monster meat. It was marinated in a thick, sweet soy glaze. It looked exactly like the street food I used to eat before the world ended. I bought 5 skewers using a silver button I ripped off the hotel bathrobe. The smell was incredible. Charred fat, sweet glaze, and cheap vinegar. After 1,000 years, I was finally about to take a bite of real comfort food. But apparently, the universe's primary directive is to ruin my meals. Just as the skewer touched my lips, a massive explosion rocked the slums. The outer concrete wall at the end of the alley shattered inward. The void dragon must have brought friends. Stepping through the rubble was a colossal equine shadow demon. A towering, twisted nightmare of smoke and bone that looked like it was ripped straight out of a horror myth. It reared up, its roar shattering the neon signs. The entire market panicked in an instant. Survivors trampled each other to escape the alley. The old vendor screamed, bumping into his own stall as he fled. The tray of freshly grilled, perfectly glazed skewers flew into the air, tumbling toward the filthy dirt floor. I moved faster than the system could track. I caught the tray 1 inch from the dirt. Not a single drop of glaze was spilled. My blue system scars flared as I slowly looked up at the towering horse demon charging down the alley. It had almost ruined dinner. The demon charged down the narrow alley, smashing the corrugated metal stalls into shrapnel. Captain Jean finally unholstered his rifle, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't even aim. An A-rank boss in an enclosed civilian area was a worst-case scenario. I told Jean to put the gun away before he shot my food. I stepped into the center of the dirt alleyway, balancing the tray of skewers in my left hand. I didn't want to vaporize this one, it would get dust on my meat. I pulled the useless survival manual from my back pocket and rolled it up. The towering demon lunged, its jaws opening to swallow me whole. I didn't dodge. I just brought the rolled-up book down on its snout. A microscopic, heavily concentrated pulse of logic break energy transferred through the paper. It wasn't enough to delete the code, just enough to scramble its artificial intelligence. The colossal boss monster slammed face first into the dirt, its terrifying smoke aura dissipating instantly. The system recognized an overwhelming disparity in stats. The demon didn't get up. It pressed its massive, skeletal snout into the dirt and whimpered, trembling like a scolded dog. I tapped the rolled-up book against my palm. The apocalypse is tough, but 1,000 years of grinding teaches you exactly how to discipline bad pathfinding. Since it ruined the food stall's seating area, it owed me a favor. I hopped onto the demon's broad back. It didn't dare move a muscle. I finally took a bite of the skewer. The sweet soy glaze and charred fat were absolutely perfect. I nudged the demon with my heel, and it began walking gently through the slums. The crowd parted in absolute silence, staring in shock as I rode an A-rank boss through the market, eating street food. I looked down at Captain Jean, who was trailing behind with a completely blank expression. "Come on, Jean," I said. "Let's go find dessert." The glowing manna fruit shaved ice was acceptable. But as I threw the paper bowl away, I noticed the state of my hands. 1,000 years in a dusty dungeon, fighting an ogre, plus wading through slum dirt. I desperately needed a bath. I asked Jean for the nearest hot spring. He laughed nervously, stating that sanctuary water was heavily rationed. The only natural hot springs left were 100 miles away in the Ashlands, an SS-rank volcanic death zone where the air itself caught fire. I didn't care if it was a death zone. My pores were clogged. I nudged the shadow demon, and it broke into a terrified gallop out of the sanctuary gates. Captain Jean yelled something about suicide missions as he scrambled into a military jeep to chase me. The Ashlands lived up to the hype. It was a hellscape of jagged black glass and rivers of bubbling magma. The air was so hot it warped the horizon. It was the perfect temperature for a deep tissue soak. My demonic taxi refused to go any further. It was panting, its smoke aura burning away in the ambient heat. I was fine. My system's scars were naturally absorbing and nullifying the thermal damage. I hopped off, looking for a decent pool to soak in. I didn't have to look far. The ground erupted, and the landlord arrived. The Inferno Colossus. An SS-rank elemental disaster made of living rock and concentrated magma. It roared, radiating enough heat to instantly melt steel. The Colossus slammed its fists into the earth. The ground beneath me collapsed into a perfectly circular crater, instantly filling with superheated, concentrated hellfire and liquid magma. Captain Jean screamed from his jeep, assuming I was being incinerated. It was exactly what I needed. The concentrated hellfire was completely negated by my defensive stats, leaving just a deep, penetrating warmth that relaxed my muscles. I leaned back against the obsidian rim and let out a long sigh of relief. It was a fantastic jacuzzi. The Inferno Colossus stopped roaring. It leaned over the pool and stared down at me. If a giant pile of rocks could look confused, it did. Its AI couldn't calculate how a human was taking zero damage from its ultimate hellfire trap. I opened one eye. The magma was nice, but it was a bit sticky, and the golem was blocking my view of the ash-choked sky. A little too hot, I told it. I raised a wet hand and flicked a tiny spark of logic break energy directly at its core. I didn't delete the boss this time. I just edited its environmental parameters. The logic spark hit the golem's core. In a flash of white system light, the thick, sticky magma instantly transmuted into crystal clear, steaming hot spring water. The towering SS-rank Colossus was forcibly downsized. The Colossus was reduced to a foot-tall glowing rock elemental. I set it on the edge of the pool to keep the water at exactly 104 degrees. I placed a towel on my head and sank into the crystal-clear water. Perfect. Captain Jean finally climbed out of his jeep and stumbled over to the crater. He looked at the pure water. He looked at the terrifying SS-rank boss that was now functioning as my personal bath toy. His brain simply stopped working, and he dropped to his knees. I looked over at Jean. The man was covered in sweat, ash, and the stench of fear. I held out a bar of soap. "You look terrible, Captain," I said. "You should wash up before we head back to the hotel." We sat there for an hour. A perfect, crystal blue oasis in the middle of a literal hellscape, heated by an apocalyptic disaster. The world was ending, humanity was on the brink of extinction, but finally, I felt clean. Fresh from the hot spring, I headed back into the city. My faded survival manual mentioned the military training stadium had a pre-war vending machine that still stocked melon soda. I didn't care that they were hosting the annual Hunter Awakening exam. I just wanted my drink. I strolled right through the active firing range. Fireballs and ice lances splashed harmlessly against my passive system barriers. I didn't even blink. My eyes were locked entirely on the retro red vending machine humming in the corner. I was 10 feet away when a guy in pristine gold armor stepped in front of me. Examiner Kale. He looked at my ripped jeans, my bare chest, and my towel, and immediately assumed I was a lost, unawakened beggar trying to steal from the recruits. He demanded my hunter license. When I didn't have one, he smirked and forced me toward the mana measurement crystal. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the rookies by publicly displaying my lack of power. I sighed and tapped the crystal. The gem was designed to measure standard human mana capacity. It wasn't built to process the mathematical weight of 1,000 years of continuous, localized logic grinding. The 32-bit integer limit instantly broke. The crystal turned pitch black and crumbled into dust. Examiner Kale burst into hysterical laughter, loudly declaring me a zero-stat defect whose mana was so non-existent it broke the machine. I didn't correct him. I just walked over to the vending machine. I put my coin in. I hit C4. The coil turned. And the bright green can of melon soda got stuck halfway. I pressed my hands against the glass, feeling a wave of absolute despair wash over me. The universe has terrible timing. Just as I was calculating the exact force needed to rock the machine without breaking the glass, the center of the stadium exploded. A massive dimensional rift tore open, flooding the high-tech arena with dark abyssal water. An eclipse serpent. A mythical, Calamity-class boss that devours light and swallows moons. It rose from the rift, a towering nightmare of abyssal water and twisting shadows. It roared, and the stadium floodlights began to dim as it literally ate the ambient light. Examiner Kale, the smug A-rank veteran, immediately dropped his clipboard and ran for his life, shoving his own recruits out of the way. Typical. I didn't care about the giant snake. I cared about my melon soda. I pulled another silver coin from my pocket. I just needed to apply a highly precise, localized kinetic shock to the machine's coil. I coated the coin in a microscopic layer of logic break energy. Not enough to vaporize the machine, just enough to bypass the physical resistance of the glass and transfer the kinetic force directly to the stuck can. I flicked the coin. The coin phased through the glass perfectly, dropping my soda. But I miscalculated the recoil of a logic flick. The residual shockwave blasted backward from my hand. It crossed the stadium, uninstalled the eclipse serpent's head, and blew a massive hole through the reinforced steel wall. I cracked open the melon soda. It was perfectly crisp and overly sweet. I ignored the chaos, took a sip, and casually walked out of the stadium through the massive, smoking hole in the steel wall. Examiner Kale was still on his knees in the puddle. I guess my zero stats were enough. The Colosseum was in the military sector. A 10-minute walk brought me to the high-end commercial district. It was completely untouched by the apocalypse, sleek glass skyscrapers, holographic billboards, and elite hunters showing off their pristine gear. I finished the melon soda and finally took a look at myself in a glass reflection. 1,000 years of fighting an ogre had completely shredded my clothes. I was walking around the wealthiest district in the world in leather straps and ripped jeans. I needed a shirt. I walked into the first store I saw. The Apex Armory. The floors were polished black marble, and the display cases literally floated. The security guards looked like they were about to draw their weapons just because my boots tracked a little Colosseum ash onto the floor. Before I could even browse the racks, the owner marched up to me. Designer Thorn. He wore a suit sharper than most swords and looked at me like I was a mutated rat that had crawled out of the sewers. Thorn didn't even ask what I wanted. He just pointed to the door and projected a VIP-only holographic sign in my face, stating that his boutique only catered to S-rank hunters who could afford materials rarer than diamonds. I was about to ask if they carried a simple cotton button-down when a massive tremor shook the polished floors. The high-tech, multi-ton vault door at the back of the store, where Thorn kept his materials rarer than diamonds, suddenly screeched and bulged outward. It wasn't a robbery. It was a mimic. An S-rank arachnid weaver had disguised itself as the raw materials inside the vault, passively feeding on the ambient mana until it was large enough to burst out. Thorn's ultimate inventory was trying to eat him. The weaver unleashed a barrage of razor-sharp silver threads. The webbing was so intensely durable it sliced right through Thorn's premium sci-fi armor displays like they were made of wet paper. The elite guards instantly ran for their lives. Thorn just fell to the floor, paralyzed. I wasn't in danger. My passive system barriers would have shattered the thread. But the webbing was flying directly toward the empty melon soda can in my hand. I wanted to keep the can as a souvenir. I moved my hand, catching the razor-sharp thread between my thumb and index finger a millimeter before it sliced my can. The lethal momentum stopped dead against my skin. I didn't immediately destroy the boss. I looked closely at the thread trapped between my fingers. I rubbed it. Despite being sharp enough to cut titanium, the flat edge was impossibly soft. Breathable. Unbreakable. It was the highest quality fabric I had ever felt. I realized exactly what I needed to do. I held the thread taut. With a deadpan expression, I plucked the web like a guitar string, infusing the vibration with a concentrated dose of logic break energy. The logic vibration traveled up the web and hit the weaver's core. Instead of deleting the entity entirely, I just reformatted its structural data. The massive, terrifying S-rank boss collapsed inward, instantly converting itself into a massive, perfectly neat ball of indestructible silver yarn. I picked up the giant ball of yarn, walked over to the front counter, and dropped it with a heavy thud. Designer Thorn was still cowering on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. I looked down at him. I need a button down, I said. Short sleeves. Relaxed fit. 30 minutes later, I walked out of the Apex Armory. The fabric was incredible, breathable, feather-light, and completely indestructible. Thorn cried the entire time he was sewing it, muttering about how I was violating the laws of physics. I didn't care. The tourist finally had a decent shirt. I asked Thorn where to get the best dessert in the city. He stammered something about the Aegis Grand Ballroom hosting the Supreme Guild Master Summit. I didn't care about the politics. I just cared that they had a private pastry chef. The summit was heavily guarded by S-rank paladins. I didn't bother showing an invitation. I just walked past them. The ambient logic weight of my presence froze their joints before they could even draw their weapons. I pushed the doors open. The arguing stopped instantly. 50 of the most powerful awakened humans on the planet stared at me in outraged shock. I ignored them completely. In the far corner, illuminated by a sunbeam, was a towering, pristine strawberry shortcake. Guild Master Leon, a man whose armor cost more than most cities, slammed his fists on the table. He drew a golden broadsword and demanded the filthy vagrant be executed for interrupting a classified planetary defense meeting. I didn't hear a word he said. I picked up a wooden toothpick from an hors d'oeuvre platter and gently poked the frosting of the shortcake. The sponge was perfectly airy. It was a masterpiece. I was just about to take my first bite when the sky broke. The planetary defense meeting was suddenly very relevant. The massive reinforced glass walls of the ballroom imploded inward as a dimensional rift tore open directly outside the skyscraper. A void seraph. A Calamity-class entity. It was a biblically accurate nightmare of 6 wings, 1,000 twitching red eyes, and a halo made of a localized black hole. Its mere presence warped gravity inside the ballroom. The guild masters immediately launched their ultimate attacks. Fire, lightning, pure mana, it didn't matter. The seraph's black hole halo simply swallowed it all. The most powerful men on the planet fell to their knees in absolute despair, realizing they were completely outclassed. The seraph flapped its wings, unleashing a gravitational shockwave that leveled the banquet tables. I didn't care about the tables. I cared that the shockwave hit the dessert cart, splattering my pristine strawberry shortcake aggressively against the far wall. A piece of frosting landed on my new silver shirt. My left eye twitched. I had braved a slum breach, an active volcano, and an arrogant paladin just to get a decent dessert. And this oversized pigeon had ruined it. I turned around. I was still holding the tiny wooden hors d'oeuvre toothpick. I flicked the cheese off it. I didn't need a legendary sword. I just infused the flimsy piece of wood with a maximum output dose of logic break energy. The seraph recognized the threat. It locked 1,000 eyes onto me and fired its ultimate attack, a beam of holy void light designed to erase entire continents from the map. I didn't dodge. I swung the wooden toothpick. The microscopic point of logic break energy caught the continent-erasing beam dead center. Physics broke. I perfectly parried the light, violently deflecting it straight back up. The reflected beam hit the seraph with its own amplified force. The biblically accurate nightmare was instantly vaporized into system dust. The beam kept going, punching a massive hole through the dark clouds and deleting the dimensional rift entirely. The sky cleared in an instant. The ballroom was dead silent. I sat down in an intact velvet chair, leveled my glowing wooden toothpick directly at Guildmaster Leon's forehead, and looked him dead in the eye. "Your bird ruined my shortcake," I told the most powerful man in the city. "You have 5 minutes to bake me a new one." Guildmaster Leon baked a surprisingly good cake. After finishing it, I decided I needed a souvenir for my trip. The polite hotel concierge pointed me toward the Neon Bazaar, an underground black market where the city's worst criminals traded illegal artifacts. The atmosphere was entirely hostile. Mercenaries glared at me, assessing my threat level. I just enjoyed my cake. Leon used real vanilla bean in the frosting. I strolled over the glossy obsidian floors, looking for a gift shop. I found a crowd gathering around a VIP auction. Sitting in a plush purple velvet booth was Boss Silas, the kingpin of the underground. He was smoking a Blue Manna cigar and preparing to bid on the market's most anticipated illegal item. The auctioneer pulled off a silk cloth to reveal a divine artifact from the abyss. The room gasped in awe. It was a sword. Specifically, it was a heavily rusted, severely chipped, absolutely pathetic-looking iron short sword. I stopped chewing my cake. I recognized that terrible blade instantly. It was the exact same starter iron sword I had used during attempt #10,000 against the Eternal Ogre. I had thrown it away into the dungeon corner 1,000 years ago because the hilt was uncomfortable. The auctioneer claimed it radiated ancient, unquantifiable logic energy. Of course it did. I had been holding it when my stats broke the integer limit. Boss Silas stood up in his crimson suit and confidently bid 10 billion credits for my literal trash. 10 billion credits for a chipped iron sword was a scam. I needed a souvenir, and the hilt was the perfect length for a backscratcher. I stepped forward, holding my cake in one hand, and raised a single, dirty bronze 1-credit coin in the air. Boss Silas stared at me, then burst into cruel, hysterical laughter. The entire underworld market joined in, mocking the half-naked tourist trying to bid a single copper coin against the wealthiest criminal in the sanctuary. I didn't argue. I just tossed the bronze coin. The moment it hit the auction pedestal, the logic weight infused in the copper violently overrode the bazaar's digital banking mainframe. The holographic displays glitched, turning pure white, and declared the item sold to me. I picked up my new souvenir. The crowd was frozen in absolute, uncomprehending silence. I reached the sword over my shoulder and used the rusted crossguard to scratch an itch between my shoulder blades. It was incredibly satisfying. Boss Silas lost his mind. He screamed that I was a dead man and slammed a summoning detonator. The glossy obsidian floor violently shattered as his ultimate enforcer erupted from the ground, a vault behemoth. A subterranean nightmare covered in literal tungsten armor plates. The behemoth lowered its tungsten-plated head and charged, crushing the remaining auction pedestals into dust. Its neon cyan energy surged. I didn't even put my cake down. I just lowered my rusty backscratcher. I swung the rusted iron sword in a lazy horizontal arc. A weapon is only as good as the logic weight behind it. A massive, crescent-shaped wave of pure white system logic erupted from the chipped edge. The shockwave hit the behemoth. The impenetrable tungsten armor didn't even slow it down. The massive beast instantly vaporized into white system dust. The logic wave kept going, cleanly slicing through 20 gunmetal steel support pillars. The ceiling groaned dangerously. I rested my new backscratcher over my shoulder and finished the last bite of the strawberry shortcake. Behind me, Boss Silas was on his knees in the dust, his cybernetic eye glitching from sheer terror. I highly recommend the Neon Bazaar. Excellent souvenirs. After destroying the black market, I decided I needed some downtime. I read fast, and I was thousands of chapters behind on my favorite comics. I headed to the Grand Sanctuary Archives. It was a massive, cylindrical tower of white quartz and floating silver shelves. The place was dead silent. I walked across the polished quartz floor, my boots echoing slightly. I rested my new rusty iron backscratcher over my shoulder and started scanning the floating silver shelves for the fiction section. Before I could find the comics, a guy in a velvet robe floated down on a silver disc and blocked my path. Head Librarian Vex. He took one look at my ripped jeans, my open shirt, and my rusty iron sword, and immediately started lecturing me about the sanctity of the archives. Vex informed me that this wasn't a public library for peasant entertainment. He proudly pointed to a chained, vibrating grimoire hovering on an obsidian pedestal, claiming the facility only housed world-ending, forbidden knowledge. I told him that sounded incredibly boring. His arrogance must have jinxed it. The moment he insulted my taste in reading, the heavy silver chains holding the forbidden grimoire shattered. The book exploded, unleashing a massive geyser of pitch-black ink that ruined the pristine white quartz floor. A Calamity-level text anomaly. The Ink Leviathan. A colossal, serpentine dragon made entirely of shifting, liquid black ink and glowing gold ancient text. It filled the entire vertical shaft of the library, roaring so loudly the glass mana pillars threatened to crack. Head Librarian Vex immediately lost his mind. He and his elite scholars abandoned their hovering discs and scrambled across the slippery, ink-stained floors like terrified mice, dropping their priceless holographic scrolls to save themselves. I completely ignored the giant ink lizard. I had finally spotted the modern fiction section on the lower silver shelves. I reached out for a pristine, colorful comic book, but right before I grabbed it, a thick drop of pitch-black ink landed squarely on the cover, ruining it. My patience vanished. The Leviathan noticed me standing still and decided I was an easy target. It coiled its massive, liquid black body around the glass pillars and dive-bombed me, opening its jaws to swallow me and the entire bookshelf behind me. I didn't move. I took the rusty iron sword off my shoulder. It was chipped, dull, and completely pathetic. But I gripped the hilt and coated the rusted iron in a hyper-concentrated layer of logic break energy, resting it casually over my forearm. The massive ink jaws snapped shut. I casually swung the flat side of the rusty blade. I didn't try to cut it, I just swatted it directly on its liquid snout like an annoying, oversized mosquito. The impact triggered a room-spanning logic shockwave. The white light acted as a literal system eraser. The Calamity boss froze mid-air, turned completely white, and instantly evaporated into a cloud of harmless pixel dust. It was uninstalled. The residual logic wave swept through the rest of the room. It purged the anomaly entirely, instantly erasing every single drop of black ink from the white quartz floors and silver shelves. The library was restored to pristine perfection in 3 seconds. I rested the rusty iron sword back over my shoulder and walked over to the trembling head librarian. He was on his knees, staring at me like I was a deity. I looked down at him. "Your book ruined my comic," I said. "Print me a new one. Immediately." 10 minutes later, Vex used a high-tier replication spell to print me a flawless copy of the latest volume. I sank into a plush velvet reading chair, propped my boots up, and finally got to read. The world was ending outside, but the pacing in this arc was absolutely fantastic. After finishing the latest volume of my comic, I felt stiff. Reading in a velvet chair is nice, but what I really needed was a tropical vacation. I had Captain Jean escort me to the Sanctuary Grand Terminal, the city's main hub for dimensional travel. The terminal was packed with elite raiding parties preparing for life-or-death expeditions. I strolled past them, reading a travel brochure I found in the lobby. Poor Captain Jean was forced to carry my luggage, which consisted entirely of a plastic bag full of comic books. I found exactly what I was looking for. A restricted gate leading to a dimension called Coral Hell. Captain Jean practically had a heart attack, pointing at the SS-Rank warning signs and begging me to choose the artificial wave pool instead. I ignored him and tapped the brochure. "Look, Jean. It says right here, pristine, untouched white silica sand. Do you know how hard it is to find unpolluted beaches these days? I'm not passing this up." Without waiting for clearance, I stepped through the churning red gate. Jean dropped my bag of comics and fell to his knees in despair. He didn't have the security clearance to follow me. It was finally time for some peace and quiet. The brochure didn't lie about the sand. It was powdery, pristine white silica. Unfortunately, it bordered a churning, pitch-black ocean of corrosive saltwater, and the sky was a permanent, terrifying swirl of purple thunderclouds. It wasn't exactly tanning weather. I wasn't going to let a little apocalyptic weather ruin my vacation. I jammed a cheap striped umbrella into the sand, flipped on a portable warm light LED to simulate the sun, and unfolded my lawn chair. The sand felt great between my toes. I stabbed my rusty backscratcher into the sand to use as a cup holder for my melon soda, leaned back in my chair, and opened my comic book. The sound of the crashing black waves was actually quite soothing. For exactly 2 minutes. The water erupted. An abyssal kraken, the apex predator of this dimension. It was a mountain of spiked black tentacles and glowing yellow eyes dripping with corrosive purple slime. It blotted out what little ambient light was left in the sky. It slammed a tentacle into the shoreline. I didn't care about the impact tremor. But the splash kicked up a wave of corrosive black saltwater. A single, heavy drop was flying through the air, aimed directly at the crisp, glossy pages of my new comic book. I snapped the comic shut just in time. The saltwater hit the cover and sizzled. My right eye twitched. First a bird ruins my cake, now a squid tries to ruin my book. I couldn't even read a single chapter in peace. I stood up, kicking my chair back. I yanked my rusty backscratcher out of the sand, accidentally knocking over my melon soda. That was the final straw. I channeled a massive, completely unrestrained surge of logic break energy directly into the chipped iron blade. I didn't aim for the beast. I aimed for the water. The kraken was a symptom, the ocean was the disease. I swung the rusty sword in a flat horizontal arc, releasing a catastrophic wave of absolute system logic. The logic wave didn't cut, it commanded. The system received a direct order to uninstall the liquid rendering parameters of the entire zone. Millions of gallons of pitch-black water instantly evaporated into white steam. The storm clouds were erased. The kraken, entirely deprived of its aquatic environment, instantly dried out into a giant piece of leathery jerky. When the steam cleared, I had exactly what the brochure promised, an endless expanse of pristine, untouched white silica sand. The sky was perfectly clear, and the natural sun was wonderfully warm. I sat back down, opened my comic book, and finally enjoyed my vacation. After drying off the ocean, I decided to grab a real souvenir before heading back to the hotel. The Neon Oasis Casino was a massive golden pyramid in the entertainment sector. It was loud, flashy, and designed to separate elite hunters from their raid loot. I walked onto the casino floor. It was aggressively shiny. Everything was made of polished gold and crystal. Men in tuxedo armor were gambling millions of credits on holographic poker. I walked right past them. I wasn't there for money. In the back of the VIP lounge, I found it. The arcade section. Inside a reinforced glass case was a limited edition, glowing blue slime plushie. It looked incredibly soft. I needed it for my hotel bed. I put in my last silver coin. I lined up the claw perfectly. It gripped the plushie, lifted it to the top, and then, right over the chute, the claw intentionally went limp, dropping the toy. It was rigged. The ultimate scam. The casino manager walked over, his silver suit catching the light. He smirked, tapping his gold datapad, and told me that the machine's grip strength was randomized by an algorithm. The house always wins, tourist, he laughed. I didn't acknowledge him. I just stared at the glass. If the machine's programming was rigged, I just had to edit the physical parameters of the glass casing. I coated my index finger in a microscopic dot of logic break energy and tapped the pane. The logic tap didn't break the glass, it uninstalled it. The reinforced pane turned to pixel dust. I reached in and pulled out my glowing blue slime plushie. It was incredibly soft. The manager's jaw dropped to the floor. Sterling panicked. He screamed that I was robbing the vault and slammed the emergency button on his datapad. The casino's warm lights died, replaced by violent, flashing red alarms. The high rollers scattered, dropping their chips everywhere. The floor split open, revealing the casino's ultimate anti-theft deterrent. An SS-Rank mechanical chimera made entirely of solid gold and platinum. 3 heads, laser eyes, and razor-sharp claws. It was an obscenely expensive piece of machinery. The golden beast roared, charging its lasers. I didn't reach for my rusty sword. It was already dirty from the market, and I didn't want to get machine oil on it. Instead, I just squished my new blue slime plushie against my cheek. It was perfectly squishy. All 3 of the chimera's heads opened fire. A synchronized barrage of thick, superheated red lasers blasted across the casino floor, melting the gold tiles instantly. It was enough firepower to level a city block. I held up the slime plushie. I infused the soft cotton stuffing with a hyperdense layer of logic break energy. The world-ending laser barrage hit the toy and harmlessly deflected off the squishy surface in all directions. The plushie didn't even singe. I stepped forward through the laser fire and swung the plushie like a heavy pillow. I swatted the colossal gold machine directly on the nose. The logic weight behind the strike transferred flawlessly through the soft cotton. The impact didn't destroy the boss, it cashed it out. The logic break triggered the chimera's loot table algorithm. The colossal solid gold machine instantly pixelated and exploded into millions of glowing, physical gold casino chips. A literal tsunami of wealth flooded the casino floor. The floor was flooded waist-deep in millions of gold chips. I completely ignored the astronomical wealth. I waded through the sea of gold, happily hugging my new, perfectly squishy blue slime toy. The house doesn't always win. Sometimes, the tourist just wants a plushie. I had my shirt, my dessert, and my souvenir plushie. There was only one tourist activity left before I could finally go to sleep, taking in the panoramic city view at night. I took an express elevator to the Ethereum Sky Garden, the absolute highest point in the sanctuary. The garden was stunning. Transparent glass walkways floated above the clouds, revealing the entire neon grid of the city below. I strolled through the glowing magenta willows, hugging my new blue slime plushie. It was the perfect spot to relax. The observation deck was supposed to be closed. The sanctuary's religious elite had locked it down so Saintess Ilara could perform a planetary warding ritual. She was kneeling at a crystal altar, completely blindfolded, guarded by a dozen elite temple paladins. The paladins crossed their energy halberds to block me. I didn't have the energy to argue. I just kept walking. My passive system gravity locked their nervous systems in place before they could even shout. I ducked under their weapons and headed for the railing. I reached the observation deck, leaned against the golden railing, and set my plushie down. The view was spectacular. Millions of neon lights stretched out to the horizon like a sea of stars. This was exactly what a vacation was supposed to be. But the universe still hated me. The serene night sky was suddenly torn open by a blinding streak of burning violet fire. A cosmic anomaly. A living meteor was plummeting straight through the atmosphere, aimed directly at the saintess's altar. The meteor slammed into the observation deck, instantly shattering the pristine white marble. It wasn't just a rock, it was an SS-Rank starfall behemoth. A colossal beast made of jagged, molten cosmic stone and burning violet stardust. The shockwave blew the elite paladins away like autumn leaves. Saintess Ilara didn't even flinch. She stayed on her knees, her blindfold facing the towering cosmic horror, serenely accepting her martyrdom for the city. Ilara was ready to die. I was ready to kill. The behemoth had landed directly on the edge of the observation deck. Its massive, burning rocky backside completely and totally blocked my panoramic view of the city lights. My left eye twitched. I had just found the perfect spot. I just wanted 5 minutes of peace to look at the lights before going to bed. And this oversized space rock was completely ruining the aesthetic. I grabbed my rusty iron backscratcher with both hands. I stepped back, planted my feet firmly on the cracked white marble, and brought the sword over my shoulder in a textbook baseball stance. I infused the iron with a catastrophic dose of logic break energy. The behemoth sensed the energy spike. It slowly turned around, raising a massive fist of molten purple stardust to crush me. I didn't move. I kept my eye on the center of its rocky mass, waiting for it to step into the strike zone. I swung. A flawless, full-force horizontal cleave. The rusty iron blade, wrapped in absolute system logic, struck the cosmic beast dead center. The kinetic transfer was absolute. The air itself rippled from the catastrophic shockwave. The impact didn't cut the behemoth, it launched it. Millions of tons of molten cosmic rock were instantly blasted straight back up into the atmosphere at terminal velocity. The boss was knocked entirely out of orbit, pixelating into a spectacular, harmless shower of purple shooting stars. The view was finally clear. I leaned back against the golden railing and smiled. The neon city lights were beautiful, and the shower of purple shooting stars added a really nice touch to the skyline. Behind me, the saintess was crying and praying to my back. Whatever. I was finally ready for bed. I finally got a full 8 hours of sleep on a memory foam mattress. It was glorious. I woke up feeling perfectly rested and ready for a premium cup of coffee. Unfortunately, I looked out my penthouse window and saw that the hotel's ground floor cafe had been swallowed by a giant demonic plant. A Calamity-level, crimson strangler fig. A parasitic boss monster that drops its seeds into high mana zones and rapidly overgrows entire city blocks. The military was likely mobilizing outside. I didn't care. I left my sword upstairs. I just wanted a macchiato. I stepped into the cafe. The modern white quartz and marble interior was completely choked by thick, obsidian-colored bark and pulsating red vines. It looked like a dark fantasy forest had violently invaded a modern coffee shop. It was very poorly decorated. Behind the main counter, I spotted the barista. He was wrapped tightly in thorny vines, sweating and crying in pure terror as a massive, wooden maw prepared to digest him for ambient mana. I walked right up to the counter, stepping over a few snapping vines. I didn't draw a weapon. I leaned against the polished white quartz and looked up at the digital menu board. They had a caramel macchiato that sounded excellent. I placed a silver coin on the counter. The sharp clink of the metal echoed through the overgrown room. I looked the terrified barista dead in the eye. "One large caramel macchiato," I said loudly. "Extra hot." The barista was a true professional. Despite being wrapped in thorns and staring death in the face, muscle memory kicked in. Trembling and sobbing violently, he managed to brew the espresso and slide a pristine white porcelain cup and saucer across the quartz counter. The strangler fig is a mana parasite. It sensed the ambient heat and rich, roasted energy of the premium coffee beans. The entire colossal tree shifted. A massive, spike-covered obsidian vine whipped down from the ceiling, aiming directly for my porcelain cup to crush it. It was about to ruin my morning. I didn't have my sword. So I grabbed the closest object available, a tiny, flimsy wooden coffee stirrer from the condiment caddy. I jammed the little wooden stick into the path of the colossal spiked vine. The massive momentum stopped instantly. A weapon is defined by its logic weight, not its material. I channeled a hyper-concentrated dose of logic break energy directly into the fibers of the tiny wooden coffee stirrer. The flimsy stick lit up like a dying star, completely overpowering the Calamity-level plant. I casually flicked my wrist, swiping the glowing wooden coffee stirrer through the air like a tiny baton. The tiny flick unleashed a room-spanning spherical logic shockwave. I didn't input a delete command this time. I input a scale command. The catastrophic white light hit the colossal demonic tree, violently forcing its cellular system data to rapidly compact and retract. When the white light faded, the cafe was completely clear of vines. The colossal, terrifying Calamity boss had been violently pruned. It was now resting perfectly in the center of the white quartz counter as a harmless, beautifully manicured, 6-inch decorative bonsai tree. The thorny vines instantly vanished from around the barista. He dropped to the marble floor, gasping for air, staring in absolute, mind-shattered disbelief at the tiny decorative plant sitting above him. I tossed the wooden stirrer into a nearby trash can. I picked up the elegant white porcelain cup, closed my eyes, and took a long, slow sip. The caramel was perfectly balanced. The espresso was rich. It was, without a doubt, the perfect way to start my morning.